You want to make sure that you are on page 62 with your essential question of how do you determine the frequency of traits in a population. And when you see frequency of traits up there, what that means is kind of like what percentage of people have those alleles in their blood or in their DNA. Your code's 310, and your topic is Hardy-Weinberg. And like I said, right up front, you're welcome. So to begin, two things with Hardy-Weinberg. One is part math. The other is some vocab and the idea behind Hardy-Weinberg, which describes what conditions must be in place for evolution to stop happening, for evolution to cease. So we're going to talk about the end of, like, ceasing or arresting evolution, and then move on to math after that. But to get to the evolution stuff, first you got to understand some of the vocab words that are going to help us. And the first one is gene pool. I would use this in a sentence that my mom used on me frequently, which is, you must have come from the shallow end of the gene pool, would describe the word gene pool. But a gene pool is this. It is all of the genes. And when you think about genes, right, there's genes for hair color and height and intelligence and everything you can think of, there are genes for. And there are different variations of that gene, right? There's different variations for hair color, for eye color, for everything. A gene pool is all of the different variations of all the genes within an area. So we could talk about the gene pool, for instance, inside this room. And the gene pool inside this room may or may not have some genes for genetic diseases, like cystic fibrosis. You might not have it, but you could be a carrier. Or it might not be present in anybody at all. But the gene pool in this room would be defined as all of the traits, all of the alleles that we carry within us. We could change our gene pool from being just inside this room to being the gene pool within the school, or the gene pool within Grants Pass, or in Oregon, or the United States. But a gene pool is every single possible gene inside of that defined area. Right? So it's just, it is what it is. Right? If you're from Cave Junction, and we could talk about the gene pool down there, and it is what it is. Or you come to... Yeah. It was a little easier to define gene pools, right? Because humans weren't super mobile. People weren't going from Oregon to Germany and meeting their husband or wife in Germany or something like that. And so our gene pool now is all kind of one blended thing around the world. But for a time period, humans couldn't do that. We were pretty geographically limited. Kind of like animals are right now. There are deer that live in Rogue River that are never going to have a chance to breed with deer that live in Salem. They're too far away. They're never, they're two separate gene pools. They don't overlap. Yeah, such as it is. So, that's the word gene pool. Here's an example. The best I could do with a picture would be if these are bullfrogs, within that genes, they might have different genes for color. I know frogs don't come in red and blue, but you got to bear with me here a little bit. My mistake. Frogs come in red and blue. I apologize. So, in this population, you can see the gene pool would include genes for green, blue, and red frogs. If there was not a red frog that lived in this area, then obviously there would not be red gene in the gene pool. It's whatever genes are available in that specific area. That is relative frequency. It sounds like a really complicated word, but it's much simpler than the word relative frequency makes it sound. All relative frequency is it's the number of times that I wrote gene, but I meant trait, that a trait occurs in a population. As in, 30% of the people at Grants Pass High School have blonde hair. That would be relative frequency. It's how many people how many individuals in an area exhibit a specific trait. Evolution doesn't occur. So evolution would be changing over time. Equilibrium would be nothing's changing. So the population remains status quo. And before we get into it, as a question, are humans currently evolving? And if they are, can you provide proof of it? Or proof that we're not, either way. Okay, so there's some evidence, right? Our brains are getting bigger in size. Our capacity's getting bigger up here. True. Other ways humans are evolving? Weinberg, the thing we're talking about is a principle or a theorem, and it says there are factors that exist that will prevent evolution from occurring. So evolution will not occur unless these things are in place. And when evolution is not occurring, it's called equilibrium. The population is in equilibrium. Thank you. So the first one is random mating, which doesn't mean maybe what you're thinking that it means. It just means that there is no selective anything. There is no reason to mate with one thing over another thing within your species. There's nothing that, kind of like worms, I would imagine. Maybe they feel like one worm is more attractive than another, but I would assume that when one worm bumps into another worm, it's not like, no thanks. So random mating would mean there is no selecting at all. Like in giraffes we talked about, they fight for the right to mate, so there is selection there. When there is no selection for mating, that's called random mating. That's what we're talking about there. So next one we got after random mating is for evolution to occur or stop occurring, you got to have a large population of individuals. And the reason there is purely statistical. If you have a population of 10 people, and let's say 30% of them have blonde hair again, we keep going back to that, but 30% of them have blonde hair, and one day they're walking under a cliff, and a rock takes out Emmy Titus, and she was one of our 3 people with blonde hair. The percentage of people in that population with blonde hair just dropped by 10%. It went from 30 to 20%. And that's the definition of evolution. It is a change in the percentage of people exhibiting a trait over time. If you have a humongous population, of people, no offense, but if you got billions and Emmy gets a rock dropped on her head, it's not going to significantly impact the number of people that have blonde hair. Not that, we want that to happen to Emmy or anything. That within that group, there can be no immigration, which is things moving into a population, because that would bring new genes in, right? Like if you've got people coming into your population, or animals coming into your population from a different one, you'd be getting different genes into your population, which would be changing the percentage. And you can't have emigration, which is people or things leaving the population, because that's taking genes with it, right? If you go back to that bullfrog picture, and that red frog left, that changes the gene pool. And then you've got a change in the percentage of people that happen. Right? So, and that's evolution. For no evolution to be happening, you've got to have an isolated population. Can't be things coming in, can't be things going out. Number 4 on the list, no mutations. If mutations are happening, evolution has to be happening. Because when mutations happen, they're either good or bad. If they're good, they spread. If they're bad, they decrease until it's gone. And that is the definition. All these conditions need to be in place for equilibrium to exist. And that is that no natural selection is occurring. There's no animals just die randomly. There's no rhyme or reason for it. It's not like they're slower or faster or anything like that. They just drop dead. If any one of these conditions is not in place, evolution is going to occur. So this is what it takes. The opposite of any of these is what it takes for evolution to happen. That's what it is. Skylar?